When it comes to the NFL draft in recent years, unfortunately for me, and it breaks my heart, there has been a severe devaluation of the running back position. And like I said, it sucks because teams buy into this running back by committee stuff, and they buy into the notion of you just don't need to take a guy that high and everything else at that position. But the fact is if you get a guy that is that talented, that is that good, and why wouldn't you take him? Because running backs can be difference makers. Running backs can be potential franchise changers, even in today's NFL still. Ask the LA Rams if they regret taking Todd Gurley 10th overall. Ask the Vikings if they ever regret taking Adrian Peterson 7th overall. I mean, it's one of these things, I guess it is what it is. Yes, you can find value at the position in later rounds. Can't dispute that. All types of evidence there. But at the same point in time, maybe that's its own self-fulfilling prophecy because so many running backs don't get drafted around number one that by default at some point in time, some guys rounds 2 through 7 or even the undrafted ranks are going to eventually be some of the top guys, because they're just not taken as high anymore. But you could also say, that you have offensive tackles and offensive linemen that are drafted past the first round that become studs. You have wide receivers like Antonio Brown who were 6th-round picks that become all pros. You can look at Richard Sherman, Cam Chancellor, 2 studs in the Legion of Boom secondary in Seattle. They were both 5th-round picks in consecutive years. Josh Norman, who just got a shit ton of money from the Washington Redskins, was a 5th-round pick in 2012. So if I use that philosophy that is assigned to running backs and apply it to other positions, why the hell would I want to take any of these positions high and take any of these positions around number 1? I'm just asking. Because there are plenty of guys that end up in the Pro Bowl every year that weren't first-round picks. There are plenty of guys that every year on the All-Pro teams weren't first-round picks. But somehow this logic has stuck to running back and running back alone. I understand it to a degree, but that doesn't mean I get it, and that doesn't mean I necessarily agree with it. Now, looking in terms of this year's running back class, you can see my rankings for players in the description box down below. Let me start off by saying first, what I'm referencing here is how I grade them as a talent. Myself, my opinion. This is not necessarily a reflection of indication of where I think they will be drafted or are going to be drafted, in some cases because of where they're ranked, where they should be drafted in this year's draft. It is a ranking of their actual talents. Now, when I look at this class, I think it's got some depth to it. And I think it has a little more depth to it than I thought it originally did. I think last year's class, we were talking about there's depth. I actually think maybe top to bottom, this year's running back class is better than last year's. That's just my opinion. I think there are some guys that go under the radar here that will be more productive NFL players and even starters at the position than people want to lead on or lead you to believe. Now, it's interesting, though, when you look at next year's draft, we might not be having the same running backs don't matter conversation with guys like Leonard Fournette, Nick Chubb, Christian McCaffrey, Perine from Oklahoma, Dalvin Cook, obviously, from Florida State. There are 5 guys that could potentially be first-round picks, if you really want to be honest about it, from that running back class next year. So it will be interesting for me to see how it plays out with this year's running back class, especially with the top few guys, with a lot of teams perhaps looking a year ahead. And sometimes that happens. You piece together a draft strategy, not just based off of the holes on your roster and how you grade the overall talents, but you do that in part with saying, hey, this is what next year's draft class is going to look like. We could see some of these running backs drop further than they should in the draft because teams are going to look and say, hey, I'll wait until next year and I'll roll the dice on Fournette. I'll roll the dice on McCaffrey or Perine or Cook. That could happen. Chubb, whatever the case might be, that could very well potentially happen. But let's look at this draft class. To me, the clear-cut number 1 running back in this draft is Ezekiel Elliott, who I compared a lot to Matt Forte. He can do everything. To me, he's a top 5 talent beyond question in this draft. I don't care what anybody wants to say about devaluing the running back position. You can pound it up your fucking ass, and you can suck my dick. He's clearly the number 1 running back in this class to me. Clearly. He can play out in multiple systems. He can do everything. He runs with some physicality. I'd like to see him run more physically, but he's got good quickness, good speed. He's got solid hands, very effective blocker as well. To me, when you're talking about safe bets in this draft, he's as safe of a bet to be a star at the NFL level as anybody in the entire draft class at any position. But there's more to this draft class than just him. Now, some of you might wonder, why do I have CJ Prosise from Notre Dame as my number 2 overall running back? I look at Prosise, and I think he's been very underrated throughout the entirety of this draft process. Maybe it's because of the fact he only spent 1 year as a starter at running back for Notre Dame. Maybe it's the fact that he's so new to the position. Maybe it's the fact that he sat there and he was overshadowed by Will Fuller some. Maybe it's the fact that he was a converted wide receiver who didn't really stand out at that position, and now he comes here. Maybe it's a fear of the talent that he played behind in terms of that Notre Dame offensive line. Maybe it's a number of things. But when I look at CJ Prosise, he's got size, quickness, speed, hands. He could do a lot of things. And when you're talking about looking for 3-down running backs in this draft, to me, he has some Le'Veon Bell type of ability. He has some Chris Johnson type of ability. I think we're looking at a 3-down NFL starting running back. And for me, when I look at his flexibility, his versatility, his athleticism, and the different things that he could do, I think he's the number 2 running back in this class. I've got Derrick Henry, number 3. I'm in between on him. Some people are higher on him. Some people are lower on him. I kind of come in the middle. I think in the right situation, the right system, he could be a featured force. But could he be limited as a pass catcher, especially when you look at also the recent history of Alabama running backs at the NFL level? It's been a mixed bag. You've got Trent Richardson out there. You got Eddie Lacy out there, TJ Yeldon, Mark Ingram. Some good, some bad, some in between. So you have a concern about him translating to the NFL because he's very similar in body type to a Trent Richardson. He's very similar in body type to a guy like that. Is he going to really translate to the NFL level? I don't know. There's a lot of scatty, kind of quick, shifty backs in this draft to me. Not necessarily fast, like burner fast, but you have several kind of like undersized type of guys like Paul Perkins and Kenneth Dixon and so on and so forth. And I like both of those guys. I like Perkins a little bit more at UCLA. I think he's another guy that doesn't get nearly the attention he deserves in this draft process. And I've got him 4th on my running back board, even ahead of Alex Collins. I like Alex Collins a lot. I think he did a lot with his opportunity that came here in 2015 with Jonathan Williams' injury. And he's got some off-the-field questions, but, an incredible cutter. I mean, the best cut ability out of the running back position in this draft, in my opinion. His ability to cut in the open field and cut on a dime is incredible stuff. I like Kenyan Drake kind of bit as in terms of not somebody as an every down back, but somebody that will sit there and be deployed in different roles that you can utilize a lot in your offense, but you don't have to count on him to be that dude. I have some concerns about whether what Kenneth Dixon has done at the college level at Louisiana Tech actually translates to the NFL level. But my God, I love the way he runs, and he is a lot of fun to watch. And I got to imagine, with as productive as he was at college, he's going to find a way to be productive at the NFL level. One thing I will talk about is there is a lack of running back talent in this draft with truly special speed. Like even guys like Prosise, Henry, Elliott, yes, all 3 of them. They have good speed. Henry will surprise you with his breakaway speed. But that's not special. The ironic thing is he probably has a little bit more true breakaway speed than Ezekiel Elliott, if you want to be honest. But him, Prosise, Elliott, not exactly burners. You look at other running backs, Dixon, Perkins, Collins, Williams, Howard, Coprich. They're not really Devontae Booker. They're not really burners. So you get a guy in a draft like a Kenyan Drake, his pure speed, his top-end speed for this year's running back class could probably help his draft stock, as it might somebody like a Keith Marshall. In terms of certain players that you'll look at and wonder why I have them ranked in a certain spot, I'm sure Devontae Booker is going to be a popular question for me. Well, let me just spell out why I have him ranked as low as I do, which is a 4th to 5th round prospect. It's a couple of reasons. Number 1, you've got a guy coming off of a knee injury. Number 2, you're talking about a guy that's going to be coming into the NFL at 24 years of age at a position already where those guys tend not to last as long, which is the running back position. I have some questions about his overall speed. I have some questions about his mentality. So there are some severe questions there. And when I look at it, how high of a pick do I want to spend on a 24-year-old running back who's coming off of a knee injury who lacks, to me, true breakaway speed, and how much of a weapon is he truly going to be in the passing game. I look at these different things, and I sit there and say, I just don't see what all the buzz is about Devontae Booker, similar to what I said last year about Amir Abdullah when everybody's talking about him as a second-round pick. I think I had him like as a 9th or 10th running back on my board and like a 4th to 5th round talent, if I'm not mistaken. I just didn't see it. And similar this year with Devontae Booker, I just don't see it. I just don't. I just don't. But again, I look at the depth in this class, and I think there is some good depth. I don't know how far back you can actually go to get a starter out of this draft class. I don't know if you want to look past the 4th round to get that, but you can maybe find some role players rounds 5, 6, and 7, guys like Kelvin Taylor and Tre Madden, Josh Ferguson, Tyler Ervin. I'll even throw out somebody like a DJ Foster kind of under the radar. You'll have guys that I think can stick on an NFL roster. So I like this draft class of running backs. I don't love it. I would like if there were 1 or 2 running backs that were a little bit higher up and graded out a little bit better. But, you know, if you want an impact player out of this draft as much as anybody else, you take Ezekiel Elliott because he will be a stud, in my opinion, bar none at the NFL level. I'll be stunned in 3 years if he hasn't made a Pro Bowl or so, and I'll be wondering and trying to backtrack and figure out what the fuck I missed and what the fuck happened. Because everything to me is a clear indication that this guy's going to be a stud. But I think there are several other guys here that could actually surprise once they get to the NFL level, where teams are going to potentially underdraft them, and then they far outplay their draft value. Prosise, Henry, Perkins, Collins, Drake, Dixon, Jonathan Williams, Keith Marshall, Jordan Howard, Marshaun, Coprich, as the most notable examples I could think of. I think all of those guys can be valuable contributors and in some cases be potential featured running backs at the NFL level.